Hey guys, it's Scott. We're going to take a look at building formulas for things like calculating waste, calculating custom increments when we want to round or rounding by custom increments. And then we're also going to go over some if statements and how these can all be used to work together in unison. So let's take a look, and let's start by building a formula for waste. And what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to type in the takeoff for the veneer stone and have it calculate the waste for us. Here's how we're going to do that. We're going to start by starting with the parent quantity. Okay, so let's say we've got 10 square feet. This is going to help us keep the math easy. Save changes. It's going to give us 10 square feet. Now, we can take this and we can multiply it times 10%. And what does that give us? That gives us 1 square feet. Okay, so we know the math is mathing. Now, we want to take that percentage and add it to that existing 10. So we will then take that 10%, and for the ease of visibility, we're going to put the parent quantity here plus the parent quantity times 10%. And that's going to give us our number of 11. Now, some of you may be seeing this and think, Scott, we could easily just take the parent quantity and multiply it times 1.1. And that's going to give us our 10% overage, and it's going to make this formula look smaller. And I'd agree with you. It would make the formula seem simpler. But I would challenge this approach with this question. When we build these formulas, we tend to set them and forget them. And so if a year from now or 2 years we come back and we want to make revisions, let's say we need to change our overages from 10% to 15%, what we'll need to do is we'll need to refigure out the math because we didn't write out the math that we have for the formula. This is a pretty simple example, but if there's more complicated math that's happening for your quantities and from your takeoffs, then coming back and seeing a formula that looks simple, but you don't know why something was being multiplied by 0.62, then you'll have to refigure out that math. It'll be harder to make revisions to that later on. So what we tend to preference is we preference writing out the math so that we can see this and edit this later on. So now an example of editing this, let's say we've got 20 in here. Okay, it's good, it's working for us. So let's say we do want to control this, but we don't want our estimator to have to go into a formula and edit a formula. It's very risky in the sense that a formula could be broken, something could be added or deleted that doesn't work, and so we want formulas to work in the background for us. So one of the ways that we can do this is we can add a parameter in place of this 10%. So what we'll do is we'll come to parameters, we'll add a parameter, we'll call it waste. We're going to use the number versus a pick list or formula. And we'll make this say 15%. Now in this spot, we type in 15%, hit enter, or click somewhere, click out of there. It's going to turn it into a decimal. So let's save. And now in place of this formula, go ahead and clone it. We can now take this times waste, and it's going to give us our waste of 15% added to the original amount of 10 square feet. So this is a way to implement a parameter. If you want to do custom parameters, this can be as complicated or as straightforward as you'd like for your needs. You could have waste for different types of materials. For example, when we buy sod, we put in 20% waste because no matter how well we try to measure the irregular shapes of yards, it's just good for us to always account for about 20% That's what our experience has been. All right. So now let's talk about what kind of numbers we want to see when we are ordering things like our natural stone veneer. So when we buy our veneer from our supplier, it comes in different size boxes. We can get it in a box, which is about 12 square feet. We can get it by the half pallet, which is about 50 square feet, or we can get it by the full pallet, 100 square feet. And most of the time we're either buying boxes or to the nearest half pallet. Now that doesn't get us there when we're going as accurate as the square footage. What we need to be able to do is round to a custom increment. We're going to need to use the ceiling function to calculate this increment. So the way we're going to start is, let's take our parent number of, say, 10, but we need to round to the nearest 12. We've got our parent quantity, so we're going to start with our number, and we're going to divide by 12. See what this gets us. It's going to give us this increment here. And then we want to take that and round it up to the nearest whole number. And what this is going to do is it's going to give us the units. We're basically converting 10 square feet into units of boxes, which is a 12 square foot unit. And then we're going to multiply it back by that increment. So we're going to take this and use the ceiling function. This gets us 1 square feet. Then we will take this number and then multiply it by 12. So the result is that any number that we type in here that's less than 12 rounds up to 12. But the moment we're over 12, now we're at 24 square feet. So the number that is being produced for this item is moving at steps of 12. Let's say let's put these two together. The parent quantity right now is the exact amount that was coming from the takeoff, but we just use this formula to calculate the waste. So we want to be able to capture that waste in a formula that is also rounding to the nearest increment for a box of veneer stone. The way that we're going to do this, so we'll copy this. We will come into our parameter here. Instead of it being just the parent quantity, we're going to put a bracket. This is going to give this section of the formula a place to live. We'll paste it in there. And now we've got a formula that takes our takeoff amount, the amount of square feet that we measured for the outdoor kitchen. Say we measured 27 square feet. Okay? It is rounding up 10%, and then it is rounding up to the nearest 12th square foot, which is 1 box of veneer stone. So, as you can see here, what we're doing is it's very similar to building a house. We've got the pieces of the puzzle, things like the parent quantity and the math that we use to get to the numbers. Those are like the 2x4s. And then we've got the parentheses and the functions. That's like the nails. And so we're using this to build a larger formula that at first glance looks and feels very complicated, but it's really just a handful of pieces that are stuck together to do what we need to. And what we're doing right now is the process of how we build these formulas. So we've got now a ceiling function for a veneer stone that calculates waste, and it rounds up to the nearest 12. Now, let's say we've got a larger outdoor kitchen and we need some more stone. They've also got a fireplace, say, and we need to calculate a larger amount that then moves to increments of 50 because we want to go by the half pallet. So we don't want to buy 14 boxes. We want to be able to buy X amount of half pallets. We're going to use an if statement. So let's start very simple. And here's the syntax of our if statements. If the condition, and that's like an item, And these syntax pieces are separated by the commas. So we've got if, condition, comma, then true. If not, when it's false. If statements behave like forks in the road. If it's less than a certain amount of square feet, we want to go by boxes. If it's larger than that number, then we want to go by half pallets. So let's start building this if statement. If, okay, go ahead and click it here. The parent quantity is less than or equal to 48, then we want it to produce the number 12. And if it is larger than 48, we want it to produce the number 50. And we will then close our parentheses. And now you see here what we've got is, it looks at 36. It says 36 is less than or equal to 48, so it'll spit out the number 12. If we type in 11, if we type in 48, if we type in 49, this now changes to 50. Now the reason why I'm showing you this step is because as we're building formulas, we want to see how the pieces are working as we're building the formula. It is unrealistic to think that we'll write out a whole formula and all of the pieces are going to be working together. We need to make sure that this widget spins the right way before we attach it to this other lever. So now that we see that this is working the way that we want it to, we're going to go in and start substituting some of the pieces. Let's start with the parent quantity. How do we calculate the parent quantity? We wanted to be able to find the square footage, the parent quantity with its waste, because that's how much we need to buy and make sure that we're accounting for. So we'll go into parent quantity as we did before in the last formula here. We'll delete that. Personally, I like to create the home first because sometimes these formulas get a row of parentheses and you're not sure which ones belong to which. So we create the home first, then we paste it in there and we stop. Is it working? Yes, it is still working. Okay, let's clone this so we can see our work. Okay, now we want this formula. It's not always going to be 12. What if we need 26 square feet of natural stone? Let's say we need 26. It's not going to be 12, but we do want it to go, this formula, to go by increments of 12. So when the statement that 26 square feet plus its 10% waste is less than 48, then we want it to run this formula, which is, again, calculating the waste, and then the function to calculate the custom increment. Okay, let's see how that works. So if I type in 26, it rounded up to 36 square feet. If I type in 22, rounds up to 36. If I type in 35, it's counting for the waste, and so it's rounding up to 48. Okay, we're getting there. Now let's do the same for 50. We're going to copy this function, this formula here, and in place of 50, Control V, now we've got a formula that sits in place of that. So if our stone selection goes north of 48, let's say we do 47, but we need to round up, it's going to round, let's see, you know what? This is still rounding by 12. So it did it twice. We need to go into this here, make this 12 of 50. Okay, now I want to point something out. Earlier we talked about being able to edit formulas. This is where this comes in handy. So we round by 50, so it's north of 48, but we know by looking at 50 plus 5%, we need 55 square feet. We don't want to buy 2 half pallets. So we want to buy 1 pallet and maybe a box. And so what we'll do for this situation is we will just adjust this. Let's say 72. If it's less than 72, like we can get 5 boxes or 6 boxes, but once we start getting to box 7, let's just go to the next full half pallet. Okay, so we're going to pick 72 as our number. And now what we've got, I'm going to space this out a little bit so we can see it here nicely. If this parent quantity that calculates waste is less than or equal to 72, then run this formula, which calculates the waste plus a custom increment of 12. If it is higher than 72, then run the formula for the parent quantity for waste and go by increments of 50. And here's the result. Let's say we type in 70 square feet. It's going to run the second half of the if statement because it did not qualify against this factor right here, this criteria. And so it is going to then run this section, this formula right here. And it's going to go to 50. And that is how you can use parameters for calculating waste. If we need to go in and say, you know what, the 10% has really been working for us, let's go with that. It's going to affect all of our formulas that have this, and we don't have to go back into our whole catalog and adjust for the waste percentage. So that is a way to control the formulas with parameters, to use the ceiling function for custom increment rounding, and how to use the if statement to adjust how much we need to order according to the scale and the volume of quantity that we get from our takeoff. So that's it. Thank you.